And here we go. Episode 131 of the PatteFacts streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts from. It is October 6th, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm William Patteson. All right, all right. I know it's been a minute. It's been about a month since I've recorded a podcast, and I know that's terrible. And I want to get as many of these out as possible, but I've got a lot going on. Being on the air 5 times a week, having a 2 hour show, there's a lot of prep work for that. And a lot of it crosses over. There's a lot of college football I'm talking about on Fox Sports Knoxville, but it's really tough when I'm also doing graphics and also trying to really pump out content on the social media side for the PatteFacts. And we've made a lot of progress there. We had a great t-shirt sale a couple of weeks ago. I'm so appreciative of all of the orders. Had over 60 shirts ordered. Really, really cool stuff there, and really excited to see people repping that around town. And it's just a lot. There's a lot going on, and it's tough for just one guy to do all the editing and the video and the graphics and do all this stuff. So I do apologize that it's been a minute since we've talked, but I'm really excited to be back. Had a lot of free time this weekend, knew I could get an episode out this week. So I wanted to make sure to hop on it. And we're doing a Monday release. We usually do Tuesday releases because that gives me a little bit of wiggle room during the weekend. But we're doing a Monday release. Again, I'm sorry, but it's tough for just one guy to get all this done. But we've got so much to talk about today. From week 6 of college football, it seemed like a boring slate to a lot of people, but 3:30 had a ton of fireworks, and there were a ton of fireworks throughout the day. So we'll get into all the big-time matchups and big-time storylines: Penn State, UCLA, Alabama, and Vanderbilt, Miami, and Florida State, Texas and Florida, and we'll also get into some of the smaller games as well. But so appreciative of you tuning in, and I know it's been a minute, so I'm really appreciative for you tuning back in, as it's been a little bit. But make sure you're following at the PatteFacts on Instagram. Really, really trying to pump as much content out on there, trying to grow that brand as much as I can. So follow at the PatteFacts on Instagram, at the PatteFacts on Twitter, at TPFacts on Sports on TikTok, and then also at the PatteFacts on YouTube. We've gotten some great subscribers recently just doing some short form content. So make sure you're following over there as well. So now that we've got all the announcements out of the way, let's get into the week 6 takeaways from college football. And we'll begin with Penn State and UCLA. And I am documenting this as James Franklin's worst loss ever, as number 7 Penn State falls at UCLA 42-37. And the pregame storylines coming into this one was, how does Penn State respond after losing to Oregon at home in double overtime? What does UCLA look like after firing their offensive coordinator earlier in the week? As we know, this UCLA team has been an absolute mess. Nico Iamaleava transfers over to the Bruins in the offseason. That was the big talking point. One of the biggest storylines we've ever seen in college football was Iamaleava's transfer from Tennessee to UCLA. And the Bruins are 0-4. They fired their coach. They fired their offensive coordinator. It's been an absolute mess. And on Saturday, when CBS panned into the game, it looked like, it was empty. And that's a historic stadium, and that is a program that, at least back in the day, had a lot of fire to it. And it was surprising to see a top 10 team in the country come in and the place basically be deserted. But as the game went on, people started to file in. Maybe UCLA traffic or LA traffic was keeping people up. But regardless, it was a mess through the first 4 weeks of the season for UCLA, first 5 weeks of the season for UCLA. And on Saturday, things totally flipped a switch. I will give credit to the Bruins here in a minute, but let's focus on my takeaways and really my main takeaway from this one. And this is what happens when you overlook opponents in 2025. We've seen this time and time again in college football, where a power conference team plays an inferior opponent and just feel like they're going to be the better team on the field, regardless of what happens. We saw this last year with Notre Dame and Northern Illinois. The Fighting Irish come off a big-time win at Texas A&M. They come into that Northern Illinois game thinking they'll just walk right through them. And instead, Northern Illinois gets a win in South Bend. We've seen this last year with Alabama as well. Alabama plays Vanderbilt on the road. Vanderbilt's never been worth anyone's time of day in the SEC. Now, obviously, since that game, we know that they are worth the time of day. But at the time, Alabama and Vanderbilt was one of the most lopsided matchups on paper you had known over the last 10, 15, 20 years, really ever since Vanderbilt's played football. Alabama comes off that big-time win over Georgia, overlooks their opponent, and boom, you get a big-time loss. You could say the same about Florida and South Florida this year. The Gators with DJ Lagway, a top 15 team in the country heading into the season. They play South Florida, who did get the win over Boise State in the opening week, but this is Florida at home. Surely they'll just waltz right over South Florida. No, it's what happens when you overlook your opponent. And Penn State was victim of that on Saturday, thinking they could just walk in and destroy an 0-4 UCLA team. Penn State had won 34 games in a row against unranked opponents before Saturday. And this is James Franklin's worst loss in my eyes, because this is an inexcusable performance on both sides of the football. Let's start with the offense real quick. Drew Aller finishes with 278 total yards, but in the first half, this offense could not move the football. And a big reason why is because Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, two guys that I was head over heels for coming into the season, combined for just 89 yards on 19 carries for the game. Both of those guys have been severely underwhelming this season. And they're also, as a group, outgained by UCLA, 435 yards to 357 yards. A UCLA team that has an offensive coordinator that just started on Tuesday is able to put up 435 yards of offense up against this team, and Penn State is not able to, either match or exceed what the Bruins are able to do. And this is a UCLA team that has lost to Northwestern and UNLV, New Mexico. Utah is a good football team. I'll give them that one because that's a tough matchup. But this is not like this was some juggernaut defense that has been keeping opponents from getting in the end zone all year long. I think Penn State's a better team on paper than Utah. Utah walked in that same building at night and put up over 40 points. And I just thought the offense looked completely lethargic in the first half. They finally got things going in the second, but it was almost too late because the defense wasn't able to get stops. And I think late game situationally, actually, before we even get to the late game, let's talk about the end of the first half for Penn State. You have 3 timeouts. And James Franklin basically says, we're just trying to get off the field. We're trying to not make any more mistakes, just go to halftime and reevaluate things. What in the world is that? You got 3 timeouts with around 2 minutes remaining in the half, and you're on the 50-yard line, and you're running these little draw plays and halfback dives. That was concerning. Surely Penn State has more of a more aggression than that up against UCLA. I get it. You made a lot of mistakes, but that was inexcusable. The second half, they came out with a lot more fire. They get a defensive or / special teams touchdown with the punt block that, results in a scoop up in the end zone. And Penn State gets on the board that way. That was really big in terms of the momentum. But on 3rd and 7, you allow Nico Iamaleava to run 50 yards down the field. So, it was a combination of a lot of things, but, I mentioned that late game scenario. I want to get back to that real quick. 4th and 2 with the game on the line. I know you have 3 timeouts in your back pocket, but you've got the football with 2 yards to gain, and you run a fake sweep quarterback run with Drew Aller. That's the best play you have in the playbook when you haven't ran the football well all game with 2 running backs that were supposed to be, top 3 round picks in the NFL draft this upcoming year heading into the season. Drew Aller running it is your best play call? What the hell was that? So this whole game was just defined as poor coaching, poor time management, and a ton of lackadaisical errors for Penn State. And these are the type of things that come from a type of matchup where you just feel like you're going to walk in there and win. Like, let's go back to Florida, South Florida. That was one of my examples earlier. Florida had a lot of boneheaded penalties, spitting on players late in the game. That allowed South Florida to get an automatic first down, get in field goal position, win that game. But before that, 3 touchdowns called back for penalties. You had the special teams miscue. You're not executing in the red zone. You're taking 3 instead of 7. Like, stuff like that, those things build up. And it built up for Penn State on Saturday, where it got to the point where they were having to do a fire drill just to get out of UCLA. And they obviously couldn't do it, but they had really poor time management and situational football in some very key moments. And that's coaching. I know James Franklin's one of the biggest punching bags in college football, but Saturday is the type of game where you just point and say, how does this happen? Like, because James Franklin's whole narrative is he can win the easy ones. He can win the ones he's supposed to win on paper. But when it comes to the big dogs, the night games, the Oregons, the Ohio States, he can't get it done. Saturday was, this guy can't even get it done against UCLA with a top 3 roster in the country. And James Franklin's contract runs through 2031. His buyout, $56 million entering the season. So it's not like they can really fire him right now or fire him at the end of the season. I think he's here, at least for the time being. Now, if things continue to go off the rails, I'm sure the boosters will clock in and have something to say about it. But the big takeaway here is this is what happens when you overlook your opponent. And Penn State got what they deserved. They thought they could just waltz in and beat little old Nico Iamaleava and UCLA with the offensive coordinator that started 4 days ago. Seemed very simple. Big bad Penn State coming off a tough loss to Oregon at home. A game that there were plenty of red flags in that one as well, but we let it go. But even through the course of this season, Penn State has been underwhelming each week. I mean, I know like a lot of people are gamblers out there and will bet on Penn State. They're 0-5 against the spread this season. But like even in the games against Nevada and FIU and Villanova, like they've let down. They haven't been that impressive. They're like that FIU game was kind of weird. Like FIU kind of hung around for that one. At halftime, it was like 17-0. And I know it's, you're up 17 points and you can't take any win for granted, but Penn State should not be in a dogfight in the first half with Florida International. So I think there were red flags throughout the season with this team to this point. And Saturday, everything became unraveled when you couldn't get stops and when you couldn't execute offensively in the first half at all. And you also had a lot of poor coaching techniques, poor game management techniques, poor play calling in critical moments. Now, James Franklin's not the only one to blame, because I do want to talk about Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator for the Nittany Lions, who comes over from Ohio State. That was one of the big hires of the offseason. In fact, he's the highest paid coordinator in the country. And UCLA, with a guy that just started 4 days ago, goes for 435 yards. This is a very talented defense. Very talented. There's no way that New Mexico and Utah and UNLV could get to Nico Iamaleava, Northwestern could get to Nico Iamaleava, cause a lot of pressure, and Penn State couldn't. I mean, again, I don't want to discredit what Nico did, because he did play a really, really impressive game. But Penn State should be able to contain him if every other team they've played has been able to do that too. So this was a really bad performance from Jim Knowles as well, who I think is a really good coordinator. Obviously had a ton of success with the Buckeyes last season. But, I mean, he deserves a lot of blame as well for schematically losing to a guy that was basically a graduate assistant, a couple of weeks ago. So we'll talk more about Penn State, where they go from here in a minute. But overarching takeaway from this one, this is what happens when you overlook your opponent in 2025. Now, for UCLA, I am happy for Nico. I am happy for UCLA. It's been a tough year. And covering Tennessee football for Fox Sports Knoxville, I know all about Nico Iamaleava. I know all the ins and outs of what happened in the locker room and what was said and what happened over the course of his time at Tennessee. And I know a lot of people still hold that against him. And there's a lot of that within me too. I know a little bit more than I should probably. But this was a cool story on Saturday. And I did feel good for Nico that he was able to get a win. The cool story in this one is Jerry Neuheisen, who takes over play calling duties earlier in the week. As I mentioned, they fire damn near everyone over the last couple of weeks. They get rid of the offensive coordinator, and Neuheisen, who's the son of Rick Neuheisen, who's on CBS Sports, does the pregame, postgame, halftime show for the CBS crew, is also on Inside College Football on Tuesday nights. I tune in that pretty regularly as well. But Neuheisen comes in and they pump out 435 yards of offense, 269 yards on the ground. They had Penn State on their heels the whole game. And it wasn't like they totally changed up a lot of what they've done. And I've watched a fair share of UCLA this year. It's a lot of what Nico ran at Tennessee, where it's a lot of RPOs and you have a lot of options. Nico has the option to run, option to hand off, or option to throw it to the sideline. But they haven't really been able to find the consistency in that aspect. And I thought you saw more dropbacks and more potential for Nico to get out as a runner. And he had a lot of success doing that. Nico in the air goes 17 of 24, 166 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then 16 carries for 128 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. This was a brilliant performance from him. I thought one of the best throws was on the 2-point conversion try, where Nico evaded pressure, spun out of the pocket, rolled her out to the left, and zipped it into the back of the end zone, finds an open receiver, gets drilled right after. But that was the type of play that Nico Iamaleava was hyped up to be coming out of high school. And that was the potential that a lot of people saw at Tennessee. Now, last year, there was a lot of inconsistencies in SEC play, but he did show flashes at times of what he could be. I think the big gripe with him was he just got to be more accurate down the field. And I think the big bonus with Saturday's performance was that he was efficient. 17 to 24 is really good in the air, but he also had the effect on the ground. But on those deep ball throws, he was able to connect on, I think, 1 out of 3. So he's completing 33% of them at least. At Tennessee, he was like a 10% guy, like where the overthrows were just a really big part of it. And UCLA had a big chunk play in the second half that gave them the opportunity to get in scoring range and punch it in. That was one of the biggest plays of the game. And again, credit to Nico for being able to deliver that football. That was in tight coverage, and that gave UCLA a big boost when Penn State had started to get a little bit of momentum. So Neuheisen deserves a lot of credit. That's a really tough situation to come into. Hey, we're 0-4. We're up against the number 7 team in the country off a loss at home to a top 10 team in the country in Oregon. And they're going to be upset. They're probably going to want to, take out a little bit of frustration on you. And Neuheisen was like, no, I'm going to do my thing. And it was funny listening to him after the game, talking about how he was still figuring out like the headset and all of that stuff. It's just so cool. And he was overjoyed. And UCLA was overjoyed. This is what college football is all about. I know UCLA is 0-4 heading into this game, and they're not going to have much of a season going from here. They'll probably lose their fair share of games coming up. Maybe they'll change. I don't know. But Neuheisen gets carried off the field, a Gatorade bath, smiles, everything. That's what it's all about, man. And I thought that was really, really fun for them. And I was happy for Neuheisen, UCLA, and Nico. A strong performance from all of them all the way around. It's the first win by UCLA against a AP top 10 team since 2010. And UCLA also became the first team that was 0-4 or worse to be an AP top 10 team since 0-6 UTEP stunned number 7 BYU, the then reigning national champions, in 1985. So what you witnessed on Saturday, folks, was something that has not happened in a very long time. So credit to UCLA, really good performance. So they were able to get it done on both sides of the football and won situationally as well. Let's go back to Penn State, however, to wrap this game up. Drew Aller post-game, I thought was a little bit snappy with the reporters. And I know that players and coaches don't owe the media anything, but as someone that's in the media and has been in those rooms before and has interviewed players and coaches before, like we're just trying to do our job, right? Like you're trying to coach a football game. My job is to ask questions, get information, and be able to spurn that into a story or just my own personal knowledge. And I know that after the game is not the best opportunity to talk to a player. These guys are competitors. They're upset. They're frustrated. They're like, many Penn State fans and members of the fan base. They're frustrated they lost this game. But I thought Drew Aller showed a little bit of unprofessionalism after the game when talking about that, this is still a playoff team. The question was, do you believe this is still a playoff team? And Aller responds, what do you think? And the reporter goes, I don't know. I'm asking you. And he goes, like, yeah, obviously. Like, just a little snappy. And I feel like that's kind of the state of Penn State football right now. They're all kind of on edge. James Franklin's always on edge. I always thought it was unprofessional for him to go get involved with any of the fans. You're above them. You don't need to do all of that. And it trickles down to the players as well in these moments where I get it, they're frustrated, but the answer would have, the better answer, the better reaction would have been, yeah, we still have everything in front of us, right? Like Diego Pavia, and we'll talk about that game here in a minute. I thought Diego Pavia handled himself well at the podium after the game on Saturday. He's talked more than anyone. He's the one that's getting the brunt of every loss for the Commodores, but he handled himself well. Said, hey, they have one loss, we have one loss, we still have everything in front of us. That should have been Aller's approach. Like, hey, there were 2 lost teams, there were 3 lost teams that made the college football playoff last year. We still have everything ahead of us. So I wasn't a big fan of that. I just think it's a heat of the moment thing, but I think it also is a representation of the type of attitude and type of feel right now that many Penn State fans have and that program has after an unimpressive start to the season. So Penn State has at Iowa coming up in week 8. That's going to be a tough matchup. Iowa plays really good defensively. Gronowski at quarterback, a little bit of a wild card. He's good on the ground. There's been better on the ground than he's been in the air. But Iowa's a tough place to play. They'll get up for that one. At Ohio State, it's going to be in week 10. That's off a bye. Maybe an extra week of preparation helps out, but right now Ohio State continues to play really good football. I have a hard time believing Penn State goes on the road and wins that one. And then you have Indiana in week 11. So back-to-back matchups up against what will be top 15 teams in the country. We'll see what Indiana does against Oregon this upcoming weekend, but the rest of their schedule sets up to where they'll be, at the worst, a one-loss team heading into that matchup. So for a Big Ten championship, that's going to be off the table for Penn State. For the college football playoff, they've got to win out. But I think this loss to 0-4 UCLA might be the nail in the coffin. I have a hard time believing if they lose that game, they're going to be able to spurn off, a 3-0 record against at Iowa, at Ohio State, Indiana. So this is going to be a very disappointing season for the Nittany Lions. I had them in my top 3 heading into the season. I think they were number 2. Yeah, number 2 in the season, in the preseason, I should say, just because of all the talent they returned. And I thought they had fixed the wide receiver issue by adding Devontae Ross and Trevor Penna through the transfer portal. But this is a group that is underwhelmed. And I also look at the running backs as a big reason why. Both Nick Singleton and Katron Allen have not been the same player we saw last season. All right, we'll move to Texas and Florida. The Gators play a complete game at home, and I wish I bet on this one. I really did. I thought about it all week, and I saw Florida was like pretty public early in the week on like Tuesday or Wednesday. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll just stay off of it. This kind of feels like maybe a big public side where everyone gangs up on Florida thinking they can win at home. So I stayed off of it. Texas ended up being the public side here. And anyway, I wish I took it. But hey, another positive week for the PatteFacts. 5 straight positive weeks for the Pattelocks. Make sure you're tailing at the PatteFacts on Instagram and Twitter. Another plug right there. But number 9, Texas falls at Florida, 29-21. And the pregame storylines coming in this one was, can Florida finally string together a competent offense, specifically a competent passing game, consistent passing game, despite going up against a very talented Texas defense? Anthony Hill Jr., Colin Simmons, Michael Taft, Jelani McDonald, a very, very talented defense for the Longhorns. What does Florida look like up against this group. It's going to be a tough task. Does Texas look improved against a Power 4 opponent? Outside of Ohio State, Texas hasn't played anyone this season. So this was going to be a litmus test of how they've improved a month into the season following that loss to Ohio State in week 1. And then also, kind of focusing on the quarterbacks here, DJ Lagway, Arch Manning, two guys that were highly propped up to begin the season, have kind of underwhelmed. Which quarterback off to a rough start prevails? That's what I was watching for in this one. And I think we got a lot of answers here. And we'll begin with my first takeaway, and it's that Florida shows that they are a good football team when the passing game works. Now, I know I haven't been able to say this on here because I haven't done an episode in a little bit, but on Fox Sports, I've been talking about this for weeks. I think Florida is still a good football team. I think their biggest issue when you look at all of their games this year has been their passing game. It's been way too inconsistent, but defensively, they're stronger than anyone in the country. I think their run game is really, really underrated with Jaden Ball. And on Saturday, you finally saw what the offense looks like when they're able to get it done in the air. 457 yards of offense, 298 yards in the air, 159 yards on the ground. They had 10.64 yards per attempt on their throws. This is the Florida offense that we expected coming into the season with DJ Lagway, and this is what I thought this team could be at their best. DJ Lagway goes 21 of 28 for 298 yards, 2 touchdowns. You get complimentary football from Jaden Ball, who goes 107 and a touchdown on the ground. That was really big. But going back to Lagway, you've always had that run game be pretty consistent this season. I thought they went away from that against LSU, where they ended up throwing it damn near 50 times against the Tigers. That's not going to work. But when they had that balanced attack and DJ Lagway is able to settle in, this is a good offense. We'll talk about the receivers here in a minute because I thought those were really big too. And also the fact that the two biggest performers on Saturday at receiver were freshmen is even scarier for this team. But DJ Lagway looked composed. He looked the part. Completes 75% of his passes, stayed in the pocket, did not try to force it into tight windows. And there were a couple of plays that were really, really impressive. There was one play on a 3rd and 7 where Lagway kind of sidearms it. And I'm not a big fan of these 5-star quarterbacks starting to sidearm every throw. That was a big hit of mine on Arch Manning early in the season, and DJ Lagway as well, trying to sidearm the football. But he had one of them that was perfectly executed, and he had to do it because of the pressure incoming on him. Zips it out to, I think, Vernell Brown on a crossing route, picks up the first down. That was a really impressive play. And I think he just got momentum and found the consistency, which I think has been the biggest issue for him all season. Hasn't had much momentum, hasn't had much consistency. And as a quarterback, you need that to find that confidence. And Billy Napier talked about it this week. He said this is the best he's looked this season in practice. That's a lot of coach speak, I know, but I saw that quote on Wednesday and I was intrigued by it. I was intrigued, okay, do we get a different version of Lagway on Saturday? And this was the best performance of the season, and Florida was able to orchestrate some of the best drives of the season offensively with Lagway at quarterback. And again, I mentioned Jaden Ball in the ground game because Florida needs that kind of production, 107 on the ground from Jaden Ball. That's complimentary football. That gives Lagway the opportunity to take a little bit of a break, pick up some chunk yards on first down, stay ahead of the chains. That's what happened for Florida on Saturday. And there were a lot of really strong possessions for the Gators. And Dallas Wilson and Vernell Brown at wide receiver were really big impacts as well. Dallas Wilson is a guy I talked about in the offseason when I did my preseason top 25 teams. I mentioned Dallas Wilson because he was really impressive in the orange and blue game for the Gators in the spring. And he's a true freshman. He's missed the first part of the season due to injury. This was his first college game Saturday. And he goes for 6 receptions for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was all over the field. He was a playmaking receiver. He was a play waiting to happen. And I gave the comparison this offseason for Dallas Wilson to Jeremiah Smith. And it might have sounded extreme at the time, and it might still sound extreme saying this right now. But as a freshman, to come onto the scene up against this type of Texas defense, Dallas Wilson looked like the Jeremiah Smith player we saw last year for Ohio State as a true freshman. An instant impact player. You give him the football and he goes and makes a play. One of the biggest plays of the game was the sideline throw where Wilson beats his defender. His defender actually hits the ground and Wilson is able to tightrope down the sideline and still beat two defenders in front of him to march into the end zone. By the way, one of them is Michael Taft, one of the best safeties in the country. Dallas Wilson was really, really impressive. 6 receptions, 111 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's exactly what Florida was missing. And it's not like they have a bad receiving core. Like I like Eugene Wilson, even though he's been a little bit underwhelming. J. Michael Sturdivant, the transfer from UCLA, is a solid, veteran option as well. But Vernell Brown is another really intriguing piece. He's another freshman. He's the guy that in week 1 against Long Island had that one-handed catch that it was incredible. One of the best catches of the season. But he goes for 3 receptions and 72 yards on Saturday. These guys are playmakers, and that's what Florida has needed. And we'll talk more about those guys here in a minute because I was very, very impressed with them. But I also want to give credit to the offensive line for keeping a clean pocket for DJ Lagway. 0 sacks allowed on Saturday up against a ferocious defense in Texas. Anthony Hill Jr., one of the best linebackers, probably the best linebacker in the country. Trey Moore, a kind of a hybrid edge linebacker, transfer from UTSA a season ago, was really good for the Longhorns last year. Over 20 career sacks for him. This is a tough group to go up against. Colin Simmons as well. I mean, he was a monster all last season. And as a true sophomore, he's going to be playing in the NFL here soon. But this is a really good offensive line for the Gators as well. I mean, Jake Slaughter is probably one of the best centers in the country. He did a really good job anchoring that position for Lagway Saturday. And I thought they did a really good job of picking up the blitz packages and making sure that Lagway had all the time necessary. So that was really important. I thought Florida played really, really good offensively from what we've seen so far this year. And when Florida can play complementary football, get it done with Jaden Ball on the ground, and have an effective, efficient, in momentum DJ Lagway, this is still a good football team because the defense is really good. And I know Florida is 2-3. The record looks bad. But I feel like this is still a top 25 level team. William, are you kidding me? 2-3 in their top 25 level? I'm serious. You saw Saturday what this team can be when they get everything going offensively. LSU, they threw 5 interceptions and lost the game by 10 points. They only allowed 13 defensively. In any other world, that is a 40-10 game. It shouldn't be 20-10. And maybe that's an indictment of LSU, but Miami's really, really good. We saw that this weekend. And Florida hung around for the most part because of their defense. And in that game, they also had their starting 3 defensive linemen out. So I think Florida is still a good football team. The record doesn't show it. But if they can play offense like this, I think they can have a turnaround like they had last season. Now, the other takeaway from this game is both defenses are very good. I've given a lot of credit to both of them, but I thought Florida made more plays. Florida gets a block punt that results in a safety. The Gators isolated the Texas run game, only 52 yards for 2 yards a carry for the Longhorns. That was really big because it put a lot of pressure on Arch Manning, and he had to air it out a lot more than they had probably wanted to. C.J. Baxter was a late scratch in this one. He was unavailable, but Quintravian Wisner, still a really, really good running back, and they couldn't get anything going there. Manning also throws 2 interceptions. The Gators in position for both of those. Devin Moore jumps the route on the long throw down the right sideline to, I think he was trying to hit Wingo or Moore, one of those. But Devin Moore jumps the route, gets the interception, and then Jordan Castell is just, playing cover 4 zone and is just sitting right there for the interception. So 2 big interceptions in this one, but the Gators also got to Arch Manning a lot. 6 sacks in this one. That's Tyreek Sapp becoming a big-time impact. Miles Graham, a really impressive linebacker who's really good in coverage and as a blitzer as well. I just thought Florida made more plays in this one, and that was surprising because Texas does have a really good defense, and I've given Florida a lot of credit, but I thought it would have been more balanced. And the special teams and defense gave Florida a lot of great opportunities here. On the other side of that, who was going up against that Florida defense, it's Texas's offense and Arch Manning. Where do they go from here? I think execution is Texas's biggest issue offensively. I think Arch Manning cannot find a way to stay in rhythm. We saw this week one against Ohio State. He was missing throws. He was off target. He was doing the sidearm stuff. I'm not a fan of that. But on Saturday, I just thought he could never get in rhythm, and he missed on a couple of pivotal plays. Ends up going 16 of 29 for 263 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, but missed on a number of big throws down the field and took a lot of sacks because he held on to the football too much, is still missing targets and or not reading the defense correctly on a couple of those interceptions. Those in a double coverage, Devin Moore makes the pick, overthrows or puts it out too in front, too far in front of Wingo, and Jordan Castell is able to sit there in coverage and make the play. I just think consistency is the issue because he did show some flashes of some great plays. The long touchdown pass down the middle of the field, that was like a 50-yard touchdown. That was really, really impressive. That was the Arch Manning we heard all about this offseason. But I think the consistency is not there right now. And I know we faced a lot of pressure this offseason. I don't think all of it was completely warranted. I viewed him as a top 10 guy because of the potential and what I thought he could be. Because last year when you saw him play, he was a guy completing 68% of his passes and was able to go into a lot of high stakes moments and perform. I know he only started against Mississippi State and ULM, but they did use him against like Texas A&M and Georgia. He played, sparingly in some of those games, kind of like a Tim Tebow in 2006 with the Gators, where they, started Chris Leak, but would throw Tebow in there for some run plays and some gimmicks. And Tebow was able to deliver in those moments. Manning was able to do the same last year. So I think for Texas offensively, you've got all of the star power. You've got the receivers. You got to get healthy at running back. You need C.J. Baxter back there, so you have a good yin and yang with Wisner and Baxter. But I think it all comes down to all comes down to Arch Manning and the consistency and the execution from him on those big plays, because there were a number of them Saturday that you go back and look and you just say, how do they not convert this? Or even on some of the plays that he connected on, they were overthrown and put, his receivers in a really, really tight spot. There was one play down the left sideline in the first half where it's kind of a little bit of a gimmick play, and Florida's in zone coverage. The receiver beats the zone, and Manning makes the right read, but he overthrows it and throws a hospital ball. Now the receiver was able to bring it down. It was a great catch, but it could have been a touchdown if it's thrown a tad earlier and a tad lower to the ground, not as high. So it's just stuff like that, mechanical stuff that I think Manning has to improve on going forward. They're going to get a big opportunity this upcoming weekend against Oklahoma, and that's a really good defense with guys like Eli Bowen in coverage. But I just think this is a little bit of a maturing year and developing. Maybe next year he is better, but right now I just don't see it in terms of the consistency. And I think Texas has some, real concerns in terms of if this will be a college football playoff team. I just don't see how you take what you've watched so far against 2 Power 4 opponents in Ohio State and Florida and say, this is a team I'm pretty comfortable that's going to make the college football playoff right now. 2 losses already for the Longhorns and Penn State. Looking at the upcoming schedules for both of them, Florida will play Texas A&M this weekend. I think they travel for that one. Yeah, they do. They travel for that one. Aggies got off to a little bit of a slow start this week against Mississippi State, but I think they're the best team in the SEC right now, with the best win in the country, beating Notre Dame off a bye in South Bend, having to orchestrate a game-winning drive. I think that's one of the most impressive wins of the season. Gators have that one. They'll play Georgia week 10 off a bye. They go at Ole Miss week 12, and then Tennessee in the Swamp week 13, and they also round out with Florida State in the Swamp in week 14. I think this is a Florida team that can still win 8 games. I mean, I know that schedule right there is tough, but I think this is a team that can still win 7, 8 games still and have confidence in doing so. They're going to they're going to knock off another team this season or two, because this is a talented team and they do have a good defense. That Tennessee matchup in week 13, I think should smell big time problems for the Volunteers, especially if they are 10-2 coming off a win against Oklahoma a couple of weeks before. That could be tricky. And then for Texas, you got Oklahoma this week. You're at Georgia in week 12 off a bye. I figure the Bulldogs will get back to their winning ways in that one. There's no way they lose two big-time, prime-time matchups in the same season at home, as they lost to Alabama last week. And then they round out with Texas A&M at home, which could be a big-time win. That could get them to 9-3 on the season, but I just need to see more consistency out of Arch Manning before I can really give much more confidence towards this group going forward. All right, up next, it's Miami and Florida State. Miami is the best team in college football, folks. Number 3, Miami defeats number 18, Florida State in Tallahassee, 28-22. They sprint out to a 25-point lead, and they kind of skate by as the Seminoles. Give them credit, by the way, fought back in this one, did not stop because they were down. Fourth quarter heroics were on full display from Thomas Castellanos and this passing game, but it was too little, too late. And also 3 of the worst onside kicks I've ever seen. They've got to reevaluate how they're doing those. But the pregame storylines heading into this one were Florida State looking to bounce back after last week's overtime loss to Virginia. Virginia gets a big win this weekend. We'll talk about that one here, a little bit later on. But, Virginia's a good football team, but, Florida State should have expected to win that one, should have found a way. But again, kind of the same thing as Penn State, UCLA. You feel like you can just walk into anywhere and get a win. It's not how college football works in 2025. But they're looking to bounce back. Miami hits the road for the first time this season in a hostile environment. I think college football is at its best when Doak Campbell is alive and well. And it was for, I'd say, the first 6-7 minutes of this game. Not trying to do a 6-7 reference there. I was really just thinking, how the game went. But 6-7, we'll say. I'm sure that will, be a good clip. But Corey Heatherman and his defense have been so impressive this season. Gus Malzahn's offense, really tough to go up against, especially when they're in rhythm. I was really intrigued by that matchup. That's what I was looking for heading into this game. We'll get into the takeaways. Miami is just a well-oiled machine on both sides of the football. Let's start offensively. They relied heavily on its running game through non-conference play, and I think that was a good thing because in Shannon Dawson's air raid attack, you didn't want to throw too much at Carson Beck early on, but Miami really opened up the passing game Saturday. Carson Beck completed 19 of his first 23 passes with 4 touchdowns to begin the game. And it's the 5th time in Beck's career that he's thrown for at least 4 touchdown passes in a game. And he did it 3 times last season at Georgia and once in 2023. And Beck entered Saturday's game with the highest completion percentage in the ACC with a 73.2% percentage. And he finished 20 for 27 through the air to end the game. But that hot start was a big reason why. I talk a lot about consistency and getting in momentum with a guy like Arch Manning. Shannon Dawson did that for Carson Beck. And obviously there's a differentiating level of skill and experience there. But Carson Beck understands this offense, understands football, is a really good player. And when he's able to get in rhythm, 19 of 23 to begin the game, that's the way to get your quarterback off to the right start. But give credit to his receivers, man. They did a lot of the work in this one as well. Freshman Malachi Toney is one of the most electrifying players in college football this season. He had scores of 40 and 44 yards, and the latter was a 4th and 2 call by Mario Cristobal and his staff. They just give Toney the football, and he goes and makes a play. That was gutsy in the moment. But for the night, Toney finishes with 7 receptions for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. Continues to be an absolute gem for this team, and he's only a 3-star player. It's not like he was some 5-star, big 6'4" guy. This guy's 5'10", just with wheels. What a great find from Mario Cristobal and company to bring him into the program, as he has been a stud right away. And you saw that in that opener against Notre Dame. Now, CJ Daniels, another really impactful player for this team. He's a transfer by way of LSU and Liberty, now finds himself with the Hurricanes. He dashed through the defense for a 26-yard touchdown catch in the second half. It was kind of a tunnel screen type of deal where he was able to get the football, had a ton of blockers, and they just opened up the way for him to waltz right in. He finished with 5 receptions for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Beck's chemistry with Daniels and Toney has been phenomenal most of the season. But Saturday was encouraging after the Hurricanes had kind of struggled at home against Florida 2 weeks ago in the passing game, had been a little bit more run lenient in the first couple of games of the season. Daniels and Toney made their mark on this one, and Beck made sure to deliver the football in an effective way. Shannon Dawson deserves a lot of credit. Carson Beck looks like the player a lot of people anticipated he would be going into last year, and he's coming off an injury this year. He was banged up. You didn't really know what you would get from him in terms of the chemistry and understanding of the offense, but he looks so comfortable, man. And one of the cool stories about Beck this offseason, obviously, he was coming off of a surgery, had a lot of things going on off the field as well. And if you follow, pop culture, social media, you know what I'm talking about. Had a, big breakup with a celebrity. And, he put all that to the side and focused on becoming a good teammate and forming those relationships early in his Miami tenure. And, there's a story about the Super Bowl where he invited all the guys over to his house and had a big Super Bowl party, just stuff like that, man. Like, you're Carson Beck. You've got a big time NIL deal. You got a bunch of Ferraris and cars outside your house in this, luxury house that you're living in. You don't need to do all of that, but Beck wanted to make an impact, and he wanted to make the most of not being able to participate on the field. He wanted to form that chemistry with those guys, and it is shown through the first couple of weeks in the season. This Miami offense is damn good, and it's a well-oiled machine. They block really well. They've got some really flashy wide receivers. Like guys like Keelan Marion were the ones I was talking about, the transfer from BYU heading into the season. But it's been Daniels and Toney that have stole the show, and they get complimentary run game, a complimentary rushing attack as well. Wasn't as big on Saturday against the Seminoles, but they get a good balance. And again, Shannon Dawson deserves a lot of credit, but no one deserves more credit than Corey Heatherman. Miami has the most improved defensive unit in college football. Miami allowed 30 points or more in 5 of 8 ACC games last season and was tied for 68th in the nation in allowing 25.3 points per game. This year, they're allowing just 13.6 points per game and just 17.6 points per game against Power 4 opponents. Corey Heatherman comes over from Minnesota, where he had a top 10 unit defensively last year, and has totally revitalized this Miami football team and has made them the best team in the country, because they were great offensively last year with Cam Ward and Xavier Restrepo and Damian Martinez. They were really good offensively. We knew that, but they would get themselves in tough situations because their their defense was that bad. And now they play with violence. They play with execution. They play where they are all over the field and all up in your face. They make you uncomfortable. And Miami has been the most improved defensive unit of the season. Ruben Bain Jr., Akeem Mesidor make up one of the most ferocious fronts in college football. I mean, it's like 2 NFL defensive ends coming at you every play. They finished with 11 total tackles between them off the edge. And there are a lot of plays where just their presence in general is worth a tackle. Thomas Castellanos on a couple of plays had a designed quarterback run and would run to the left side, and boom, Ruben Bain's right there. So he'd spin around or change direction, and boom, Akeem Mesidor is right there. They might not have been credited with the tackle, but their presence alone is so impactful for this Miami team. And having that type of pass rush is huge to create these negative plays and to create a ton of pressure on the opposing quarterback to make quick decisions. And I think you've seen that in every game. Against Notre Dame in week 1, I didn't love how the Fighting Irish leaned on CJ Carr a ton. Now, he's turned things around. It really didn't have a bad game by any means against Miami in week 1, did CJ Carr. But I thought a lot of it was kind of dink and dunk, and let's kind of get you acclimated to college football. He's been really good since this game, but Miami did not allow for CJ Carr to have a lot of opportunities down the field. A lot of the stuff was quick because they didn't want to have to worry about Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. I think that speaks volumes to the type of impact they do. DJ Lagway was over his skis up against this defensive front, and Florida's got a good offensive line. But when Lagway, a little bit more inexperienced, was tasked with trying to move around in the pocket and being met with Ruben Bain and Mesidor, then that's a tough task for him to go up against. So it takes a lot of pressure, puts a lot of pressure, I should say, on the opposing quarterback to make quick decisions. And Thomas Castellanos, as good as he's been this season in moments, he's really undersized. And it's not like he can just, power his way through it. Like 5'10", it's tough to go up against a big old Ruben Bain Jr. who looks every bit of his size listed on the depth chart. So those two guys, I can't say enough about. But another guy I want to touch on is Jacoby Thomas, a transfer from Tennessee. I was very surprised he hit the portal, especially covering Tennessee football. I cover all these guys, and I thought it was very interesting that he decided to transfer. But he flies all over the field for this Miami team at safety. And on Saturday, recorded 4 tackles, 1 sack, 1 interception, and a pass deflection. They've got guys that are all over the field, and they've got guys that are ferocious and swarm to the football. Corey Heatherman, I think, deserves the Coordinator of the Year award. I think that's the Knowles Award, pretty sure. If he's up for it, if that's the name of it, that's what he should be up for and should win, because this Miami team has been completely different because of him. And the Canes are now state champs because they've beaten Florida and Florida State in back-to-back years. That has not happened since 2001 to 2004. And Miami is back. We'll talk about that schedule here in a minute because it could get a little bit tricky. But for right now, the Hurricanes are back. For Florida State, they're on the brink of kind of being in a little bit of trouble. That Alabama win in week 1 is still one of the most flabbergasting results of the season in my eyes, because I see Alabama now and I'm like, how did that team look like that up against this Florida State defense? And now Florida State has 2 tough losses back-to-back against in-conference opponents. Their best shot to get to the college football playoff is an at-large bid, as they're pretty much done for the ACC championship opportunities. But the Noles on Saturday were forced to become one-dimensional offensively, which is not good for this Gus Malzahn system. It's really tough to go up against when Florida State has a lead, because they're able to stretch you out and kind of set you up for a lot of stuff. Like they'll run certain sets where they'll run a run play off something, but in 2 or 3 plays later, it's going to be the same look, but they'll run a screen pass off of it, or they'll run a play action play and get chunk yards down the field. Malzahn does a really good job with that. But when you're down 28-3 and everyone on the field knows you want to throw the football, it's tough to scheme up and design anything because the opposing team knows what you're about to do. And as a result, Castellanos goes 25 of 45. You did not want him to throw the football 45 times in this one, but just with the way the game went, that's what he had to do. Throws for 272 yards with 2 touchdowns, but he also had 2 interceptions and a couple of moon balls, that is. Just a couple of bad plays, late reads, throwing into double coverage. I thought that was really critical for them. He did have 57 yards on the ground, and I think he's a solid, serviceable quarterback for the Noles, but I don't think he's someone that is going to take them to the level of college football playoff contender. He's really good, but you get a mixed bag with him. You get some highs, but you also have the lows, and sometimes the lows are what keep you from winning a football game. And I thought those 2 turnovers he had earlier in this one were pretty critical. So, Florida State has got a little bit of an easy schedule coming up. They're at Clemson in week 11, and they're at Florida in week 14. Those are their big notable games remaining. And with the way Clemson has looked, to start the season, that could be a win. That might not be as tough of a matchup as you had anticipated. At Florida, I think is going to be difficult because the Gators are going to be playing at home, and that's a rivalry matchup. But I mean, I just think this team is kind of teetering on collapsing if they're not able to get things together here soon. They've got to be more careful with the football, and defensively, they've got to quit allowing these chunk plays in the passing game, which you saw a lot of last week against Virginia, and you also saw once again this week against Miami. So I'm not ratting out the Noles yet. I still rank them in my top 25 this week because of their win over Alabama, which is still a really impressive win. But this is the type of setting where you really figure out what your team is moving forward. For Miami, they're off this week. Then they go to Louisville and they play, they don't go to Louisville. They have Louisville at home in week 8. And week 10, they're at SMU. That's a little bit of an interesting one because SMU obviously does have a Kevin Jennings, who's a really good quarterback, but I don't think SMU is that good this season. I wasn't buying their stock early in the year. I know I whiffed on a lot of teams heading into this season, but I did not whiff on SMU because I did not believe they were a top 25 team, even though a lot of people told me they were. I think Kevin Jennings is kind of similar to a Castellanos, not in size and structure, but they just make a lot of 50-50 plays. And when they go against you, it hurts you. So that's an interesting one because SMU is talented. They're well coached, but Miami rounds out the year at Virginia Tech and at Pitt. And those are possible cold weather games. And those are always the ones that trip up Miami. So I'm intrigued by both of those to round out the season in week 13 and week 14, respectively. But this is a Miami team that I believe should be undefeated by the end of the season, go to the ACC championship and make the college football playoff. They're a well-oiled machine. And Corey Heatherman, hats off to you, man. You did a great job this season, or you've done a great job this season. I should say that. Don't want to jinx the Hurricane just yet. All right, next up, we got Alabama and Vanderbilt. The Tide roll, the Pavia parade. Number 10, Alabama defeats number 16, Vanderbilt, 30-14, a score that was significant to some. Jam Miller, I owe you a steak dinner, buddy. That was awesome. That was awesome, man. Sitting here on Saturday and watching all these games. By the way, it's so fun. I know it might sound lame. Oh, the 23-year-old post-grad sitting on his couch all day watching football, but it is fun. And when you bet on these games and, post your picks out, have a lot of people tailing, have people investing money in your analysis, there's a little bit of stress to it. And when I gave out a 2-unit play of Alabama to cover the 10.5, I really needed some magic. And Jam Miller gave me some magic, a score significant to some. Thank you, Jam, for the big time play. But the pregame, same spot as last year for the Tide. Alabama comes off a big win against Georgia, faces Vanderbilt the next week. Would there be the Georgia hangover like we saw last year? Obviously, the big hype around this one was because Vanderbilt won last season. But Diego Pavia has done a lot of talking, but he's backed it up with his play to this point, an explosive offense that has lit up the scoreboard this point into the season. Pavia has turned into like kind of the gimmicky quarterback to actually a really solid quarterback this season, was playing at a Heisman level. And there was a lot of more fuel heading into this game as well, the day of and the days leading up. As Pavia said, if Vandy played their game, it would not be close, and was practicing a victory kneel pregame. All these things were combining. Johnny Manziel on the sideline looking like a hobo wearing the Diego Pavia jersey. There was a lot of emotion on Saturday. That's fun. That's fun. Vanderbilt, Alabama. I mean, in two years ago, this would have been Vanderbilt, Alabama at 12 o'clock on ESPN or 12 o'clock on SEC Network. Now you've got College Game Day going there. You've got an ABC primetime matchup at 3:30. This was awesome. And in terms of storylines, it did not disappoint. But my takeaways here, Alabama offensively, I thought won in all facets. The score does not reflect the competitiveness of the contest, but it does reflect the momentum of Kalen DeBoer and junior quarterback Ty Simpson. I'll admit when I'm wrong, folks, I do. I was wrong about Ty Simpson, at least to this point in the season. I was not impressed with him in week 1.
And I was pretty harsh on him. And I was harsh on him throughout the season. I was like, look, this guy's been here 4 years. He's a fourth-year junior. I mean, if you've had the Lambo in the garage for 4 years, why have you been driving the beat up Honda Civic? You know, but he's been good. And he's really improved since that matchup against Florida State, where I thought he was a little bit over his skis and made a couple of really big mistakes, like not running for the first down on 4th and 7 when he had plenty of room and instead trying to force it into a tight window. But last week against Georgia, he was nails. This week against Vanderbilt, he was nails. 23 of 31, 340 yards, 2 touchdowns, just 1 interception. But Alabama as a group totaled 486 yards of total offense. And they really felt like they were in rhythm here. And I think the biggest gripe I would have would be, executing with inside the 30-yard line, as Vanderbilt held them to a couple of field goals when Alabama looked like they were going to get into the end zone. And a couple of those were on Ty Simpson as well. That's a part of maturing and learning as a quarterback. He took a big-time sack on first down that took it from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 20. Just can't do stuff like that. That's a backbreaker. Held on to the football way too long. But again, he'll learn from stuff like that. And I thought they had a really impressive drive to end the first half where they go 75 yards in like 45 seconds. That was a really strong drive, and they needed that heading into the break. But looking on the other side, non-quarterback, Jam Miller goes for 22 carries, 136 yards, that very significant touchdown to some. I thought they had a pretty good running game on Saturday. And obviously that touchdown and those 22, 30 extra yards were a little bit inflated. But Jam Miller did a good job Saturday, played his part, did his role well. I thought Ryan Williams had his best performance of the season in terms of up against a competent opponent. 6 receptions, 98 yards, a touchdown, had a really nice play down the sideline, and obviously had the back end touchdown. I thought he was much better than what we saw against Florida State and what we've seen throughout the early part of this season. They need Ryan Williams to be that type of player off the line of scrimmage because he does create separation. Just got to bring that football in. He was able to do that Saturday. Jeremy Bernard, they call him Unk on the team because he's a little bit older than everyone and came over from Washington, where he was a part of that national championship runner-up team in the Huskies. But he had 5 receptions, 82 yards, and a touchdown as well. That's a guy that I love to have on this Alabama team, a veteran, a reliable target, and he's been that throughout the season. And Isaiah Horton, the Miami transfer, 4 receptions for 66 yards. I was making arguments a couple of weeks ago that he was the best receiver on this team. But I thought you got a balanced attack from all these guys, a combined 15 receptions and over 200 yards of offense. That's exactly what Alabama needed. So really strong performance from everyone offensively. I thought Alabama just was able to kind of cruise and do what they wanted to outside of a couple of good stops from Vanderbilt defensively. Now, for Vanderbilt, let me get the record straight. I like Diego Pavia. I know that might ruffle some people's feathers, and some people that know me a little bit more personally might say, oh, that's right on brand for William, liking the edgy, kind of bold take guy. I like Diego Pavia, man. He might talk a lot, and I might not agree with everything he says, but, man, he believes it. He believes what he says. And I think that's a big characteristic in a leader and a guy that's a little bit of an underdog. If you're going to play that role and if you're going to be the quarterback at Vanderbilt, you've got to have a chip on your shoulder. You're going to have to say some things that might sound outlandish to other people, but if you firmly believe it, I'm all for it. And Diego Pavia is that guy. I know a lot of people are sick of him, but man, I love that mentality. I love that dog in him. And I think his words kind of went against him this week because Vandy did not play their football. And I think that's why they lost this game, because obviously the scoreboard was a little bit more inflated than it actually was. But a couple of really key turnovers were on Diego Pavia in some critical moments. For the game, Vanderbilt has 198 yards passing at just 5 yards an attempt, 3 total turnovers, 2 inside the red zone. And I bolded that in my notes, 2 inside the red zone. Brutal in trying to beat a team like Alabama on the road. For the game, Pavia goes 21 of 36, 198 yards in the air, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and a fumble, and had about 58 yards on the ground. But Alabama did a really good job containing that as well. But the fumble in the red zone was really key, and the interception was kind of the backbreaker here that gave Alabama the opportunity to go up 2 possessions, as Vanderbilt had stopped the Crimson Tide twice and held them to 2 field goals. That's what allowed Alabama to get a little bit more of a comfortable lead. And Vanderbilt had marched all the way down the field. Just can't afford type of mistakes like that. So I like Pavia, and I think that, you know, he's good for Vanderbilt because he gives them national attention. I mean, no one was getting hyped up for, Mike Wright, the guy they had like 3 or 4 years ago. No straight to Mike Wright, but like no one was getting up for him. But now you're getting the best out of a team like Alabama from Vanderbilt because of their quarterback and because of the way they've elevated this program. Clark Lee deserves a ton of credit for making Vanderbilt what they are, with the type of, academic restraints that they have that other schools in the SEC don't. And I know the SEC is really tough to get into all around now, but, Vanderbilt, obviously a very prestigious school in terms of academics. It's tough to be able to recruit a lot of those guys because, a lot of their funding is towards towards academics and engineered towards that. But Pavia, the underdog kid from New Mexico, has put this team on the map and has given them a lot of respect. I just thought they had too many crucial turnovers and crucial mistakes, and they were not able to play their football. Another big development in this one was Eli Stowers, who I think is one of the best tight ends in the country. And he had a quiet day. 3 receptions, just 22 yards, had a number of big-time drops, too. He had the drop on 4th down that he had his hand on that, I mean, technically ended the game for Alabama, or technically ended the game for Vanderbilt. They were already down 9 points at that point. But, getting 2 hands on the football, not being able to bring that in was difficult. But my takeaway here, Alabama offensively just did what they wanted. Vanderbilt did not play their type of football. A couple of critical red zone turnovers, and that's what resulted in the Alabama win. Looking at the remaining schedules for both of these teams coming up, Alabama has Tennessee in week 8 at home. That would be another big-time win for them. They also play Missouri this upcoming week on the road. That's a 12 o'clock kick. The Tide are 5.5-point favorites as I currently record this. That could get interesting. Bo Pribula for Missouri has been really impressive this season. I wonder if Penn State, which is they still had him on the sideline, but Missouri this week for the Tide, and then Tennessee week 8, South Carolina week 9. Both of those are going to be interesting matchups. South Carolina very talented, and that one's going to be in Williams-Brice Stadium on the road. Could get a little tricky there. LSU week 11, that's off a bye. Oklahoma week 12, that's a little bit of a revenge spot from last season. And they round out with Auburn on the road. The Iron Bowl always gets tricky. I'm interested to see what version of the Tigers they get at that point in the season. But Alabama right now has marched their way back into that college football playoff conversation and national championship contender conversation. Now for Vanderbilt, is it's a team that could possibly make their way into the at-large conversation for the CFP. Let's look at their schedule. LSU in week 8. It's a tough matchup, but they do play that one in Nashville. Missouri comes in at week 9. That one is also in Nashville. They go at Texas week 10. That seems to be a loss in my eyes. I don't see the Longhorns losing that one. When you look at the rest of their schedule, they have to have that win over Vanderbilt. Auburn in week 11. That one is in Nashville. But then at Tennessee week 14 could be one of the most intriguing games of the season if both teams are 2-loss teams at the time. I think Vanderbilt will lose to Texas. I think Tennessee will lose to Alabama. 2 teams that are 9-2 that need to get to 10-2 to be a college football playoff at-large candidate. That one could be really, really interesting. Keep an eye out for that one. All right, some other notable takeaways real quick before we wrap things up. I'll give my top 25, give my final thoughts on the AP top-ranked teams to begin the season, but also do want to mention a couple of these other games that I don't have, long-winded takes on, but my whole goal here, listening to the show and listening, or I guess following on all the channels, is to be able to familiarize yourself with some schools that you might not get to watch a whole lot. So Cincinnati exposes an overrated Iowa State team on Saturday. The Cyclones, I thought, were the most propped up team in college football. They get the win over Kansas State in week 0, but have kind of slugged through the season since. And also the type of quality of wins they have are just not as strong when you see what Kansas State now looks like as they suffered their 4th loss of the season Saturday against Baylor. And like, I just feel like everyone's identity of Iowa State was, well, they won that game in Ireland to begin the season, but haven't really seen much of them since. Now, they did beat Iowa in that rivalry matchup a couple of weeks later, but I thought Iowa State was overrated. I think Rocco Beck is a solid quarterback, but I don't think they've been able to hit on those receivers like they had last year with Noel and Higgins. Xavier Townsend, the transfer from UCF, is solid, but I don't think he's near the level of what they had last year. So that's been tough. And then you lose, two cornerbacks for the season heading into this week. I thought this was a prime setup for Cincinnati. It was one of my PatteFacts plays at Cincinnati money line, as this was an odd line that a lot of people pounced on Iowa State for. I loved it. Thank you, public, for taking Iowa State because Brennan Sorsby is a quarterback you need to know about for the Bearcats. 13 of 25 for 214 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air, 64 yards and a touchdown on the ground. A very underrated quarterback in college football. Cincinnati lost in week 1 to Nebraska and Kansas City, but other than that, to have strung together a couple of impressive wins, put up 40 points last week against Kansas. They get Iowa State this past Saturday. Cincinnati, a little bit of a team to watch out for. I ranked them this week in my poll. I'll tell you where here in just a minute. But another team from the Big 12 that, for some odd reason, a lot of people I surround myself with do not understand is a good team. Texas Tech needs to be on your radar, folks. They just knocked off undefeated Houston 35-11 on the road. Texas Tech is a good team. I talked about it in the offseason, but Texas Tech is one of these new age NIL teams. They put a ton of money and ton of investments into this group, and they kind of paid their way, but they're good. Baron Morton at quarterback, 345 yards and a touchdown on 28 of 40 passes. Very similar to Brennan Sorsby, underrated as can be. And Morton returned in this game. And now Texas Tech was off last week, but the last time we saw him was against Utah. Morton got knocked out with a neck injury, returned in this one, and was absolutely nails. They've got a great quarterback. They've got a really solid rushing attack. Jacoby Williams goes 19 carries for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. And this is a group that lost Quentin Joyner before the season. Joyner was supposed to be the starter, the transfer from USC. He's out for the season. Williams has taken over the spot, and he has been great. 19 carries Saturday for 2 touchdowns and 107 yards. That's a balanced attack. And C.J. Douglas, 7 receptions for 114 yards, was one of the most underrated receivers last year, had a strong performance in the Liberty Bowl against Arkansas. And the connection between Morton and Douglas has been really impressive. The offense is really good, but let me tell you about this defense, because this Red Raiders defense is a machine, allowing just 10.5 points to Power 4 opponents that have a combined record, folks, of 8-2. Those only 2 losses are coming from the Red Raiders. This is a really solid defense. Eric Rodriguez at linebacker, all over the field Saturday, an interception, a pass deflection, a handful of tackles, one of the best linebackers in the country. This is a very, very good Red Raiders team. And when you look at the logo and look at the conference, you might say, William, Texas Tech isn't the 12th best team in the country. Get out of here. Oh, but you haven't watched this team play. You didn't watch Utah, Texas Tech 2 weeks ago. You didn't watch Texas Tech, Houston Saturday night. So don't tell me that Texas Tech is not a good team, because they are one. They are a good football team, and they deserve to be a top 15 team in the country. And right now, they are in the driver's seat for the Big 12 championship. They are in the driver's seat to be the bid for the Big 12 and the college football playoff. Keep an eye on those Red Raiders in Lubbock, Texas. A couple more games. We'll have one in the ACC now. Virginia gets their second straight overtime win in the ACC over Louisville. Their defense was big in this one. 5 sacks, a touchdown on an interception, and a fumble recovery. I had Louisville in this game minus the 6.5. I thought they were really undisciplined in some key moments and in overtime. I don't know why they settled for 3 points when they're 3 yards away. I mean, Virginia had been able to move the football all game long. I don't know why Louisville settled so quickly for the field goal. I thought their play calling was surprisingly conservative when they were, again, 3 yards away from the end zone. Regardless, Tony Elliott, a guy that was on the hot seat heading into the season as a guy that a lot of people didn't think could get it done at Virginia, former offensive coordinator for the Clemson Tigers back in the day, has rattled off 2 really big wins in the ACC, and Virginia, a team to watch for in this conference, as they've only got 1 loss. It was to NC State. But, if one throw goes the other way, this is an undefeated Virginia football team right now. Keep an eye on the Cavaliers. Moved into my top 20 this week. Miller Moss, by the way, for Louisville, tougher than a weekend at your in-laws. He's horrible. I can't stand watching him. Finally, we'll go to the Big Ten. Obviously, Ohio State got a big win over Minnesota. Not much to talk about in that one. But Malik Washington in Maryland, oh my gosh. Collapse to Washington. Oh, this was so frustrating to watch. Now, I had the Terps plus the 5.5. They covered with ease, but they led by 17 in this one before allowing 21 fourth quarter points to the Huskies. And Washington quarterback Damon Williams Jr., another guy, an underrated quarterback that you need to know about, 329 yards of total offense, 2 touchdowns, rebounded from an early interception in this one very well, was composed down the stretch, orchestrated a couple of big drives for the Huskies late. And then Maryland, I love this team. I wanted to rank them so bad this weekend. I was ready to do it. I thought they were going to get a big win at home, but they can't finish the game. Malik Washington, the true freshman quarterback for this Terps team, is really, really strong. Had a couple of growing pains Saturday, but goes 30 of 49 for 219 yards and a touchdown. This kid is going to be special. And I hope that Maryland is able to keep him this offseason. I know that's a crazy statement to make, but excuse me. But it's just the world we live in 2025 that you have to hope and pray these guys stay, especially when they're at a non-power traditional school for football. But Maryland's got a ton of young players that have played at a high level all year long. Malik Washington's one of them. He did his part in the first half, but I thought Maryland got a little bit too conservative in the second half, kind of sat on the football. And when their run game goes for 43 yards for the entirety of the game, it's going to be tough to run the clock out in this one. So credit Washington for finding a way to win. Big win for Jed Fish coming off a loss to Ohio State last week. Damon Williams, again, was nails in the final moments, but this was one Maryland should have won, but they couldn't get it done. So those are my week 6 takeaways. I'll now give my week 7 poll as we head into the new week of college football. As always, I put this out on the social media channels. So if you want to see them updated every Sunday, just follow at the PatteFacts. So at number 25, Florida State. 24, Memphis. The Tigers, 6-0, the first bowl eligible team in college football. Big win over Tulsa. A very impressive catch as well. You'll have to go check it out. A one-handed snag for one of the Memphis receivers. Can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. I wish I had it in front of me. But very impressive catch. Go check that out. Tigers, 24. Cincinnati moves into the poll for the first time this year. They're number 23. I was impressed with their win over Iowa State. I think this is a group that has strung off a couple of impressive wins. And with all the upsets last week, I had to figure out some teams to put in here. Cincinnati gets a bid. And right ahead of them is the team that beat them early in the season on a neutral site, and that is Nebraska at 22. They beat Michigan State this past weekend, a Michigan State team that I think is a little bit overlooked. They deserve some respect. But Dylan Raiola didn't have the cleanest game in this one. But again, so many upsets. And with Cincinnati being a ranked team, I have to put Nebraska in here. So The Cornhuskers at 22. BYU at 21, they make their first appearance in the poll for me. I had not ranked them in weeks past, but they were pretty dominant in the win over Pitt, even though the Panthers came back and covered pretty late. And that was significant to some. Not me, but to some. I do apologize if you were on that BYU side. At number 20, it's Vanderbilt. I did not move them this week. I didn't think Saturday warranted dropping them out of the top 25 or moving them down. I thought there was the type of performance that I expected, a close loss that was a little bit inflated by a late game touchdown. That was significant to some and me, which I'm totally for. But Vanderbilt, I still believe, is a top 20 team with the way they played on the road and a group that I think will have a lot of opportunities in front of them. Number 19, Virginia, just talked about them. Number 18, Arizona State. They were off this past week. They'll get a battle upcoming with Utah. That's going to be a big-time matchup for both teams. 17, Illinois. The Fighting Illini were off this week, but they will host Ohio State this upcoming weekend. That will be a big one. Notre Dame moves up to 16. They beat Boise State 28-7. A little bit of a underwhelming result, but Boise State does have a pretty good defensive line led by Virgin Morgan, who was really, really impressive last year. The Broncos led the country in tackles for loss last season. Haven't been as good, but it's still a respectable team, and a 21-point win up against a respectable team. Notre Dame moves up. 15, Missouri will get a real test to see how good they are this weekend against Alabama, but Bo Pribula, been one of the most impressive quarterbacks in the SEC. Michigan moves up to number 14. They got a little bit of an underwhelming win over Wisconsin, but a win's a win, and Michigan moves up. Number 13, Georgia Tech. What a world we live in that Georgia Tech is the 13th best team in the country. I do worry a little bit about this team because I think some of their wins are now a little bit less than what we had considered. Colorado in week 1 does not look as strong as it does now. And Clemson a couple of weeks ago also does not look as strong as it does now. Number 12, Texas Tech. I did a lot of talking about them earlier. This is a good football team, folks. Don't be caught on the wrong end. Number 11, Tennessee. They were off this week, but they will face Arkansas this weekend. The Razorbacks coming off of firing their coach, defensive staff. Bobby Petrino takes over. Could be an interesting one if Arkansas is able to string together some offense. And number 10, LSU. I really need to see more from them in the coming weeks. They'll get a matchup with Vanderbilt, which we'll get to see what they look like in that one. But for the time being, they've, for the most part, done their job. Ole Miss on the road was a tough game, and they lost narrowly. LSU, with that roster, still a top 10 team. Georgia moves up to number 9. The tradition like none other. They dominate after a tough loss, and they disposed of Kentucky pretty easily. You had backup quarterbacks playing in the third quarter of this one. Number 8, Alabama. Even though they got a big win, they're unmoved because I can't really do much with the remaining teams as I had them all ranked in this order, and all of these teams are still undefeated. Number 7, Indiana. 6, Oklahoma. They get the win over Kent State this weekend. Hawkins, quarterback, did the job. Kent State's not a good football team, but they still put up 44 points and look pretty strong offensively. Number 5, Ole Miss. They were off this week. They'll host Washington State in one of the oddest games of college football in the 2025 season this upcoming week. Texas A&M at number 4. They knock off Mississippi State. The Bulldogs had no answers offensively. Texas A&M's defense is really, really strong, folks, and Mike Elko has done a great job with this team. Number 3, Oregon. This is where we get to the movement because Miami was number 3 last week. Oregon, number 3. They very well could be number 2 or number 1. I really, all 3 of these upcoming teams are interchangeable, but Oregon, I think, has a very impressive win over Penn State, even though we saw what that team looked like this past weekend. Oregon is still a really good team, and they have disposed of some very bad teams very quickly. Number 2, Ohio State, the reigning national champions, got the win over Minnesota, 42-3. They'll travel to Champaign to take on Illinois this weekend. I like the Buckeyes in that one, but they have been dethroned as the number 1 team because Miami is now the best team in the country. The Hurricanes have the best resume, the best eye test. This is a damn good football team, and they're number 1 in my Week 7 poll. All right, rounding things out with my final thoughts. I know a lot of people have given me grief over the last couple of weeks about my Clemson pick and how I evaluated quarterbacks like Arch Manning and stuff like that. Look, when you do all this offseason prep, you just look at the names, the numbers, and what you've seen. And what I saw from Clemson last year was a group that played really well towards the end of the season. I thought gave Texas a big time fight, and Cade Klubnik looked the part, returned a lot of players. I thought that was going to be a team that was going to waltz its way in the ACC. Obviously didn't happen. Penn State, a team that returned a ton of production, had a manageable schedule. Obviously, they have not lived up to the expectations. Texas as well. Texas and Penn State and Clemson, my top three teams in the country heading into the season, all unranked after week 6 of college football. It's a tough shot in the heart. I do admit it. But there have been a lot of ones, a lot of games, a lot of teams I've been right on. It goes both ways, folks. But I think the thing we are starting to notice, or at least I'm starting to notice now, is that with the transfer portal and NIL, it's going to be harder and harder to predict the top teams year in and year out because there's so much roster turnover. And I think we saw a little bit of that last year. And obviously there's always a top 10 team in the country that completely flunks. But I don't think we've seen this type of level of like the consensus top 4 or 5 teams all dropping this quickly from the field. I just think it just shows where college football is. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. Like a lot of people hit on NIL and the transfer portal and say, oh, it's so bad. It's good that we get new teams and new powers and freshness each season. I mean, Texas Tech, they haven't been relevant in years. And they're a top 12 team in my eyes right now. Indiana, 2 years ago, Indiana was looking for basketball season. They could barely fill up the stadium. Now this is a team that is competing for the college football playoff once again this season. The freshness and the newness of college football with the transfer portal and NIL makes it more difficult to rank these teams. But man, it makes for some really fun matchups and really fun storylines through the course of the season. All right, that's episode 131 of the PatteFacts. I appreciate you listening along with me. You can listen to me daily on Fox Sports Fan Run Radio here in Knoxville. The Playbook with William Patteson, presented by VIP Play, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the Fox Sports Fan Run Radio app, the local dial, 105.7, 1340 AM if you're here in Knoxville, or on the YouTube/X live stream. Watch me every day. Get my takes every day. Because I don't know how much time I'm going to have week in and week out to produce these podcasts right now. I really kind of need a co-host. It'd be a lot easier if I had someone to talk to. Like the prep work, I love doing and I do it. But sitting here and talking for like an hour and 30 minutes, I've got to be mentally sharp. And sometimes after the weekends, like it's just been a long week of work and making graphics and all this stuff. It's tough to be able to sit here and talk to myself for an hour and 30 minutes. But other than that, make sure you're following at the PatteFacts on Instagram and Twitter, at TPFacts on Sports on TikTok, and at the PatteFacts on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, I appreciate it. And make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Other than that, I'm William Patteson, signing out.